John had always been obsessed with silence. For as long as he could remember, he sought it out in quiet rooms, in the stillness of night, in moments where the world seemed to hold its breath. But even in those moments of supposed peace, there was never true silence. There was always something, a hum, a distant noise, the faint tick of a clock. And lately, there had been something else. It started as a barely noticeable sound, almost like a distant tap, so faint that at first, John thought it was part of his imagination. But soon it grew more persistent, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to follow him wherever he went. At home, in the car, at work, it was always there, just below the surface of the everyday noise. Quiet, yet impossible to ignore. He tried to find the source. At first, he thought it was something in his environment, a leaky faucet, a faulty appliance, or perhaps the creak of the building settling. But as he searched, the sound only grew louder, more pronounced, and he began to realize something unsettling. The sound wasn't coming from his surroundings. It was coming from within him. A faint, rhythmic tapping deep inside his head, almost like his pulse, but not quite. It was slightly offbeat, like a clock ticking out of sync with the world around him. John sought help. He went to doctors, specialists, anyone who might have an answer. They ran tests, scanned his brain, checked his ears. Everything came back normal. There was no physical explanation for the sound, no medical reason for the constant tapping that had come to dominate his life. Stress, they said. Anxiety. But John knew better. This was something else, something deeper. One night, as the tapping reached a deafening crescendo, John found himself pacing in his darkened apartment, hands clenched into fists at his sides. His mind raced as he frantically searched for a way to stop it. Anything that could silence the relentless noise. He pressed his palms hard against his temples, as though he could block the sound through sheer force of will, but it only grew louder, vibrating inside his skull. In a fit of frustration, John grabbed a stack of books from the table and hurled them across the room. The books hit the wall with a dull thud, but the tapping didn't falter. His breath quickened as he tore through drawers and cabinets, pulling out anything he thought might drown out the sound. Headphones, white noise machines, even music blasting at full volume. But no matter what he tried, the tapping persisted, unfazed by his attempts to drown it out. The weight of it all crashed down on him, and he collapsed into a chair, hands trembling. He stared at the floor, feeling utterly defeated. The world around him felt unreal, slipping further from his grasp with every passing second. The walls seemed to close in, and the room felt smaller, like the sound was compressing everything down into a singular point of madness. And then, suddenly, the tapping stopped. The silence was jarring, as if someone had flipped a switch and the world had fallen still. John blinked, stunned by the sudden absence of noise. The relentless rhythm that had consumed him was gone, leaving behind an eerie, heavy quiet. He sat there in disbelief, hardly daring to breathe, as if any movement might bring the tapping back. The sound that had tormented him for so long had finally ceased. But instead of relief, a creeping sense of dread crawled over him. Something wasn't right. The silence felt wrong, too deep, too empty. The noise was gone. For the first time in weeks, the constant, maddening rhythm had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but the quiet he had so desperately longed for. Relief washed over him. He sat there in the stillness, breathing deeply, savoring the peace. It was over. Whatever had been haunting him was gone. But as the minutes passed, John's relief turned to unease. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive, as if the air itself was too thick, too still. He glanced around the room, his eyes drawn to the shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Something felt wrong. Slowly, he turned his head toward the foot of the bed. Standing there, just beyond the edge of the mattress, was a figure. It was one of the figures from his dreams, its face still shifting, never quite settling into a recognizable shape, its features flickering in and out of focus like a bad signal on an old television. Its eyes, however, were fixed on him, dark and empty, and they moved in time with a rhythm he could no longer hear but now felt in his chest. The The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, its presence suffocating the air in the room. John wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to break the paralysis that gripped him. But he couldn't move. The silence, once his refuge, now held him captive. He had thought the tapping was counting down to something, but he had been wrong. The countdown wasn't for him. It had always been for them, and now they had come.